Good evening, everybody. It's my privilege to be able to introduce Monika Mehta. So Monika Mehta is an associate professor at Binghamton University in New York. She's actually has a very long association with some of us in the CHR, in the sense that she did her PhD at the same time as Pramesh at the University of Minnesota. So this is a very long conversation that we're getting a look into this evening. Monika is in the English department, and her research and teaching interests include new media and film studies, cinema in South Asia, theories of nation state, feminist studies, post-colonial critique, globalization, and cultural production. She has published many things, including a book on censorship and sexuality in Bombay Cinema, and articles on transnational film regulation, globalization, and cultural production in India. There is a very long list of her publications, which I'm not going to go over because they can also look you up and read it themselves. Reading is something that they are able to do. We are very excited about your lecture this evening.
Thanks, Moritz. I'd like to thank the CHR for the opportunity to speak at the Winter School. Primesh has been telling me about the center for many years, so I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be here and to participate in this intellectual community. And it's been wonderful. The past few days have been amazing. They make me so nostalgic for grad school and having this kind of intellectual community. I'd also like to thank everybody who's helped in organizing this: Simone, Lamise, Moritz, and the many people who've helped put all of this together. This would not have been possible without all of that work and logistics. The research that I'd like to share with you today is part of a larger book project, Censorship 2.0, Hindu Nationalism and Media Regulation in Digital India. I'd like to briefly describe this project, give you a brief context for understanding film censorship in India, and then move on to a more detailed exploration of the censorship controversy, focusing on the song Besharam Rang from the film Pathan. So this is our journey. For much of India's contemporary history, censorship has been a closed-door affair conducted by examining committees. If people were upset by something they saw once the film had been censored and released, they could post letters to censor boards. State officials would review these letters and subsequently file them away in dusty cabinets. But over the past decade, Hindu nationalists, both within India and abroad, have transformed censorship into something far more visible, spectacular, and global. They broadcast their objections on virtual platforms that serve as powerful tools for influencing international corporations and political leaders. These campaigns are only nominally about the visuals or words within a given film. Rather, this new breed of censorship seeks to regulate and maintain an array of categories: citizenship, gender, ethnic identity, interstate relations, caste hierarchy, across regional, national, and global terrains. These operations marshal a persistent patriarchal narrative central to Hindu nationalism, one in which upper caste Hindu women are victims and sites of tradition, Muslim men are perpetrators who violate that tradition, and upper caste Hindu men are heroes who save women and tradition alike. At the same time, the Indian government is extending its control over Netflix and Amazon rather than enticing these corporations to operate in the Indian market. It uses censorship to shore up its moral rectitude, showing that it is not simply selling India to the highest bidder, but protecting its culture, even as it globalizes. My project seeks to tell the story of how three powerful intersecting forces, digital technologies, economic liberalization, and narratives of Hindu nationalism, have remade censorship in contemporary India. Specifically, I track objections against streaming giant Netflix, Bombay superstar Shah Rukh Khan, and indie filmmaker Leena Manimegalai, demonstrating that their industrial and social political locations offer distinct vantage points for understanding censorship. I show that Netflix's identity as an expanding global brand is dependent on its abilities to successfully navigate local markets and taste, state regulations, and domestic media industries. Shah Rukh Khan's status as a world-renowned Bombay star, combined with his identity as a member of India's Muslim minority, insulates as well as makes him a target for Hindu nationalist attacks. In contrast, Mani Megalai's obscurity as an art filmmaker who primarily makes films in Tamil points to the importance of region in analyzing censorship, while also revealing the challenges of producing, distributing, and certifying films that question the status quo. By putting these vantage points in relation to one another, I wish to underscore the complex scales through which censorship operates. The interplay of these scales both generates and disrupts Hindu nationalist deployment of censorship. The work that I'll be sharing with you today is part of a chapter on Shah Rukh Khan, but I'm happy to talk about both Netflix and Mani Megalai, as well as the process of certifying a film in the context of India during the Q&A. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with Shah Rukh Khan, are there people unfamiliar with Shah Rukh Khan? Yeah? It's too bad. Khan has primarily worked in the Bombay film industry since the early 1990s. His fan base, including fans in India and abroad, is estimated at 1 billion. While this figure might be somewhat inflated, it is safe to say that Khan has a robust global fan base, and maybe you'll become fans after this. Before moving to the analysis of the song, let me just briefly contextualize censorship in India. British colonial administrators first introduced film censorship in India. Ostensibly, the colonial state instituted censorship to guard the morals of the natives and to prevent them from sinking into depravity, religious bigotry, and ethnic strife. Such rules and institutions contributed to the formation of the colonial state and to justifying its rule. In 1918, the colonial state passed the first Cinematograph Act, and subsequently, in the next few years, censor boards were established in Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, and Lahore to examine and certify films. While the composition of these boards varied, the head of each board was a commissioner of police, demonstrating colonial concerns with security inasmuch as morality. Initially, certifying authorities were not given specific guidelines for evaluating films. Later, these boards adopted the guidelines of the British Board of Film Censors in order to draw up a list of suggestions in the form of the general principles of film censorship for guiding the inspectors of films, thus tailoring India to British cut. After India's independence in 1947, the national government, while against censorship in art and literature, viewed the very medium of cinema in a different light and felt it was necessary to retain film censorship. Post-independence reports sponsored by various governments justify censorship on the grounds that it's necessary for public protection. For the post-colonial state, much like the colonial state, Cinema needed to be regulated because its capacities posed a threat to state authority and legitimacy. We can reflect here about the post in post-colonial. While the post-colonial state prohibited certain representations, the state there, it also created a space for voicing objections, such as the Revising Committee, Appellate Tribunal, and so on. On the one hand, the state retained its authority since protests could only take place on the terms and in the spaces designated appropriate by it. On the other hand, this gesture contributed to the state's democratic ethos since it allowed protest. Post-independence, some key areas of debate on censorship have included cinema's detrimental effects on children and the so-called criminally inclined, as well as concerns about filmic representations of nation, tradition, culture, women, and the government. In the history of censorship in India, both individuals and groups have invoked a locally rooted community, religious, caste, or ethnic, to protest filmic representations. Counterintuitively, in the era of economic liberalization, such calls have increased. Post-1990s, diverse groups have claimed that their sentiments are hurt by certain representations of female sexuality, religion, caste, tradition, and history. Sentiments here specifically refer to feelings about traditions and values. Thus, one might pause here and think about how censorship adjudicates sentiments, especially when there are multiple communities involved. Which groups' sentiments are given preference? While many groups have engaged in these protests, the ones who claim to represent the Hindu community, Hindu nationalist groups, have been the most vociferous and violent. To boost their visibility, they generally target high-profile films or series that feature some combination of famous directors, reputed production houses, renowned global corporations, and popular stars. Scale is often a key political tactic in determining these targets. After all, an obscure film helmed by an unknown director or niche streaming platform would not attract the same attention. Critics of these groups often say that they employ such tactics to divert attention from dire economic, health, or environmental crises in India. I argue that such censorship controversies enable these groups to both frame what count as key political issues, as well as to reproduce a discourse which constructs the dominant Hindu majority as victims. By suggesting that Hindu culture and sentiments are constantly under threat, the Hindu nationalist parties are able to foreground and argue for an anti-minority policies. Through scalar strategies, Hindu nationalist protests have recalibrated the exercise of power among the citizenry, state, film industries, and global corporations. Their aggressive opposition has forced film industries to negotiate even when they've been granted a certificate from the government to screen their films. Technologies have played a key role in scaling up the power of Hindu nationalism. Post-economic liberalization in the 1990s, the growth of television channels, social media, as well as entertainment and news websites has widened and amplified the circulation of information. The form in which this information is delivered has shifted considerably. A tabloid aesthetic begins to be used by newspapers and news channels, displacing a more sober, restrained aesthetic. This context provides an ideal setting for the Hindu nationalist group's strategic protest, staged for maximum publicity. The media circulate this information and profit from these antics. Transnational viewers and readers become distributors, sharing the information via easy clicks on social media accounts. It is in relation to this shifting dynamic of power, changing technology, and a support of the Hindu nationalist government that protests against the song Besharam Rang emerged. Literally translated, Besharam Rang it seems like it's shameless colors, but the more apt translation is having a trait or characteristic of being shameless. Let me just move this. On November 21st, the song Besharam Rang from Pathan was approved for release by the Central Board of Film Certification in Mumbai. After receiving the clearance on December 11th, 2022, Yashraj Productions, a well-established and reputed production house, released Besharam Rang on YouTube and social media platforms. Yashraj Production here was following normal industrial practice of releasing the song prior to the film's release in order to generate anticipation for the film. Songs have multiple functions in the context of Bombay Cinema, serving as advertisements, being part of the filmic narrative, and they also circulate independently of the film, generating meanings that aren't necessarily tethered to the filmic narrative. I'd like to now screen the song. As you watch the song, pay attention to the mise-en-scène, and those of you who are able to, count the shots and the kinds of outfits that are worn by the leads. You're welcome to dance too if you'd like. Most of you probably saw, with respect to the editing, this is a really, really very, very fast editing happening. Did anybody count the number of shots? So there's over 80 shots in this song sequence. That's just a little over 3 minutes, right? Did anybody count the number of outfits or the kinds? There's about 5 outfits each, and 5, of course, if you count the bare-chested one as well, right? Which you have to count, but I'll talk more about that as we continue. So Besharam Rang's look, the dazzling view of mountains and aquamarine waters, and gyrating toned and mostly unclad female bodies on the beach, while eye-catching, was not novel. Since the 2000s, such songs have featured in many Bombay films. One could argue that Besharam Rang is a textbook example of the male gaze. Many feminists have questioned both the objectification and commodification of women's bodies under the banner of liberalization. And we can come back to this issue later on if there's questions about it. But visually, the song's appeal, as indicated at least by the film's publicity, was Shah Rukh Khan, who had last presented his gleaming, muscled chest in the item number in Darde Disco. So that's Shah Rukh in 2007. That's Shah Rukh looking even better in 2022. So Shah Rukh's daughter, Suhana Khan, uploaded this image on her handle, and noted that he was 56 years old. So she said he was 56 years old, and thus, and I note, I'm looking at all of you now, thus we have no excuses. And we truly have no excuses. Okay, so so since the Since the late 1980s in Bombay Cinema, there's been a shift in representing the male body as star discourses increasingly center fitness, nutrition, and diet. This regime of fitness has to be visible. So you have to be like able to count the abs. So it's just not about being fit. You have to be able to kind of see this. The publicity focusing on Khan's meticulously crafted body is part and parcel of this shift. Khan is positioned both as an object of sexual desire and a subject to emulate. Orally, Shilpa Rao's low-textured voice, which effortlessly glided between classical and contemporary notes, carried Beshram Rang's erotic charge. Kumar's lyrics, mostly in Hindi and Urdu with a dash of Spanish, narrate a tale of a woman who's been won over by love. In a clever twist, the lyrics cast Sharifi, which is dignity and honor, gendered social norms, as intoxicating. In a spirit of flamboyant resistance, this woman sheds these norms, turns to the wrong path, and wishes to show the world her yet unseen colors of shamelessness. The lyrics, in tandem with Rao's voice, enable us to read Deepika Padukone, who features in the song both as a desiring and desired woman, as opposed to a sex object cut to male desire. Shah Rukh Khan is represented as viewer, partner, and eventually in his shirtless avatar as swoon-worthy spectacle. The making of Beshram's song hints that Padukone's femme fatale avatar in this song had a narrative purpose. In the context of the film, the song both introduced Padukone's character Rubai, an ex-Pakistani Secret Service agent, and serves as a ploy to reel in Pathan, an Indian Secret Service agent being played by Shah Rukh Khan. As the music thumps, Pathan follows Rubai. Both he and by extension the spectators believe that he will capture Rubai. Instead, Pathan is ensnared as the final shot of Beshram Rang in the film pans to reveal Rubai lounging in the swimming pool with an extremely attractive villain clad in a pair of very, and can I say very again, small white shorts. So this was an equal opportunity film. While the figure of woman as femme fatale in an action film is a persistent industrial and narrative cliche, there are two important differences to note. First, the femme fatale is not killed or punished in Pathan. Second, the femme fatale is an ex-Pakistani Secret Service agent who eventually collaborates and becomes romantically involved with the Indian Secret Service agent. In the contemporary political scenario, such connections, especially in commercial film, are noteworthy because they substantially diverge from state agendas. Let's do the next slide. On December 14th, 2022, 3 days after the song's release, Vinod Bansal, the national spokesperson for the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, blasted the song on what was then Twitter. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad is a cultural wing of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Hindu nationalist party that is currently in power in India. Bansal wrote, "Can a Pathan who believes in Islam film such scenes with a woman with Muslim symbols? There's a limit to the absurdity of love jihadis." Further, in a video message, Bansal condemned calling saffron shameless, showing a Hindu woman wearing a saffron dress, and becoming a puppet of Islamic jihadis. Pathan here is a reference to Shah Rukh Khan's paternal genealogy. Love jihad is a construct of Hindu nationalists which constructs Muslim women as predators who trap innocent Hindu women. Concurring with Bansal a day later, Vinod Jindal, a lawyer and a Bharatiya Janata Party supporter, posted two tweets, shared 5 retweets, uploaded a video, and filed a complaint with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting alleging that the song denigrated Hindu culture and hurt Hindu sentiments. The song is being vulgar and obscene and against Hindu sentiments because Deepika is wearing a saffron bikini and sarong with Shah Rukh Khan. How many of you noticed the saffron bikini? Yeah. We all know saffron color is a symbol of renunciation, sacrifice, knowledge, purity, and service. But Bollywood turned saffron into a symbol of shamelessness by insulting color of pride and devotion by performing obscene moves in the song. The 12-second clip featuring this orange bikini, we'll come back to that later. The 12-second clip featuring this orange bikini appears at the end of a rapidly edited song in which Padukone wears 4 other swimsuits of varying colors. While Jinder and other detractors invested this attire with malicious intent, the film's director Siddharth Anand explained that mise-en-scène influenced his choice. When we were in Spain, I chose the costume randomly. We never gave it too much thought. The color was looking nice, it was sunny, the grass was greener, and the water was blue, and the orange color was looking good, unquote. In concert with Jindal and Bansal, several other politicians, organizations, and individuals declared their objections to the song, calling for both the banning of the song and the yet-to-be-released film Pathan. One religious leader even called upon people to set the theaters where Pathan will be screened on fire. Nearly all the complaints held the stars featured in the song, Deepika Padukone and Shah Rukh Khan, responsible for its offensive nature. For those of you who know something like about filmmaking, this assigning of authorship is interesting, given the industrial labor of producing a song, which involves choreographers, lyricists, playback singers, composers, costume designers, and various other members of cast and crew. What makes possible these nearly simultaneous objections to Besharam Rang? Social media and online news enable instantaneous and concurrent responses, gluing individuals and creating like-minded groups. The ability to post multiple times, share posts and hashtags creates a percussive movement that reverberates and echoes. Moreover, by citing stars, such posts expand their reach. Entertainment and news outlets amplify such posts through taglines and pronouncements like breaking news, a nation divided, or interviews with Hindu nationalists. These posts and news do not simply reflect a community's opinions. Rather, they create that very community, its salient values, and such controversies. While the Hindu nationalist views found support in the virtual world, they also encountered opposition. In 2 Times Now interviews, which Jindal retweets, that the female anchors persistently challenge both Jindal and Bansal's stance on this song. In fact, at the end of the interview, one of the anchors asserts that petitions like Jindal's are a waste of time, and the government should not pay attention to such frivolous matters. Many of Jindal's detractors took much delight in posting sensual songs from other Hindi films that feature actors wearing saffron. And some of these actors are actually now members of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is currently in power, so it was particularly amusing. Others questioned the Hindu nationalist copywriting of saffron. The objections to Besharam Rang adopt and cultivate Hindutva-looking practices which seek to generate dichotomies, fix identities, and create boundaries. Such practices invite us to view Padukone and Khan as not actors, but as ossified Hindutva versions of upper caste Hindu woman and Muslim man. Saffron is pigeonholed as a Hindu color, and Khan's paisley green shirt is a stand-in for Islam. Building on this narrative, arguments lead to love jihad, where Muslim men seduce helpless Hindu women and subsequently torture them. Moreover, Jindal's petition, via its prepositional choice, Deepika is wearing a saffron bikini and sarong with Shah Rukh Khan, betrays that consent rather than force was at issue. The real problem then with the song was that its oral articulation and Latin-inspired choreography constructed Padukone, read as upper caste Hindu woman, as an agent who desired Khan, read as Muslim man. Far from the lurid visions of the Muslim man projected by Hindu nationalists, both Khan's star image and his performance in this song represent him as a charismatic partner. Thus, the hysteric pitch, mostly of Hindu men, disclosed anxiety and fear about Hindu women choosing Muslim men as lovers. While a synchronic effort was at play with respect to the calls for banning this song, a diachronic strategy is visible with respect to the film if we consider that 6 months earlier, on August 14th, 2022, Jindal tweeted, PR has started to save hashtag Pathan, hashtag SRK may spend lots of money to save his movie, hashtag Pathan first day, first show is started, let's defeat this anti-Hindus and anti-nation, hashtag boycott Pathan, hashtag anti-Rashtriya Hindu Sevak Sangh, hashtag Pathan, hashtag Hindu ecosystem, hashtag Hindus wake up, hashtag Pathan nahi chalega. Along with this tweet, Jindal shared his version of the publicity poster of Pathan, which features Khan's image crossed out in red. Jindal's tweet suggests that these protests are not spontaneous, but carefully plotted. Interestingly, the so-called offensive clip and stills of the saffron bikini remain on online news channels and Twitter accounts. This continued visibility and circulation reveals that the goal of these protests is not simply to ban media texts or to cut them. Rather, they're meant to fuel hurt sentiments, to incite violence or its threat, and to generate fear in anti-Hindu nationalists. Spreadable Media's authors point out that the emergence of social media as well as streaming platforms have radically transformed viewer participation, enabling viewers to become distributors by sharing content and even producers by uploading their reviews or covers. We can use these arguments to think about how spreadable media transforms the role and scope of citizenship. The case of Besharam Rang shows social media produces netizens who function as expanded citizens, extending and questioning, as well as questioning the logic of the state. Both in an interview and tweet, Jindal represents himself as a heroic figure whose interventions compel the Central Board of Film Certification to review the song and the film. By constantly citing him, Twitter posts and online news affirm this view. The Central Board of Film Certification's chairperson at the time, Prasoon Joshi, acknowledged the significance of viewers such as Jindal by stating, quote, "The CBFC is always committed to finding the right balance between creative expression and the sensibility of the audience," unquote. He underscored the importance of culture and faith, while also noting, quote, "We have to be careful that it does not get defined by trivia," unquote. I want to draw attention to two salient points. First, Jindal, a middle-class lawyer, and Joshi, a Central Board of Film Certification chairperson, views circulate on similar forums, Twitter, online news, and entertainment magazines. This is different from and early broadcast or print eras where the two would not have had access to similar platforms. Second, the fact that Joshi, the chairperson, must acknowledge that viewers like Jindal, even if he thinks that their arguments are trivial. Such acknowledgement underscores the power both of social media and Hindu nationalists who work via such media. As this song was circulating, Pathan was submitted for review to the Central Board of Film Certification. The board's report circulated online and was easily accessible. This was quite the contrast from my treks to Bombay to locate such certificates in the 1990s. This report listed a total of 12 broad changes made by Yashraj Productions. Out of those, one pertained to Beshram Rang, where suitable shots were replaced and the following removed: close-up shots of buttocks, during the lyrics "Bahut Tang Kiya," the visuals of sensuous dance movements get reduced, as well as a side post featuring partial nudity. The saffron bikini is not mentioned in the report. The cuts to Beshram Rang were similar to the ones that I'd encountered in the 1990s when vulgar, quote-unquote, vulgar songs circulated. They showed a preoccupation with the female body and female sexual desires. Most of the deletion substitutions, however, in this report focused on the Indian state and its Russian ally. Specifically, the references to RAW, the Indian Secret Service, and the KGB, the Russian Secret Service, the Indian Prime Minister, and Russia were removed. And one can think here that partly this removal had to do with India's long-standing relationship with Russia, but also at the time when this film is being released, India is getting its oil from Russia. How does one read this report, the cuts and modifications? One could argue that the Central Board of Film Certification, while nodding to the Hindu nationalists, nevertheless asserted its authority by not banning the song or removing the so-called offensive saffron bikini. Here we might note the differences of opinion within the state with respect to both Hindu nationalism as well as the Bombay film industry. In other words, there wasn't agreement about the validity of such grievances or that the Bombay film industry needed to be disciplined. These cuts, much like the 1920s and 1940s reports of the British colonial state, as well as the 1975-77 emergency, also betray an anxiety about the representation of the state. Specifically, they signal Prime Minister Modi's insecurities about his portrayal. Having encountered such reports during my fieldwork at the Central Board of Film Certification in the 1990s, I was most disturbed by the fact that the report only showed what was removed and substituted by Yashraj Productions. It did not list the initial changes required by the examining committee, along with the censorship guidelines that indicated why the changes were being demanded. The fact that a governing body no longer needs to provide reasons for its decisions marks a plummeting in democratic ethos. Since at least 2011, Shah Rukh Khan has been routinely targeted by Hindu nationalists who have characterized him as a suspect citizen whose loyalty and morality is constantly under question. In October 2021, Khan's son was jailed for a month on charges of possessing and distributing drugs. Later investigations revealed that the charges were false, and the police did a stakeout to nab him. And that stakeout had been premeditated. Rumors circulated both on and offline that this attack on the son took place to punish the father. During this investigation, and even after his son's release, Shah Rukh Khan, who throughout his career has been visible, vocal, and accessible, retreated from public sight. Photos of him attending functions, interviews, or even tweets were not available. Close to Pathan's release, Yashraj Productions decided to forego usual publicity events, such as press junkets or city tours. While Khan emerged from his silence, he did so only briefly to interact with users on Twitter. As Pathan's release approached, Hindu nationalists vowed to disrupt its screenings. Conversely, Khan's fans, as well as anti-Hindu nationalists who missed Khan and were angered by the Hindu nationalist antics, bought tickets to Pathan in droves. Khan's global fan clubs played a key role in publicizing the film and urging the audiences to go see Pathan. Social media transmitted videos of crowds waiting to see Pathan, packed theatrical screenings, and elated global viewers throwing confetti, bursting firecrackers, and dancing to Jhume Jo Pathan, which is another song in the film. And this is all happening inside the theaters. The affective force of these videos amplified the film's appeal, as indicated by its tremendous box office success. My favorite video featured male fans entering a theater in India wearing saffron shirts with SRK emblazoned on the back. These viewings transformed the theater into a carnivalesque space, overthrowing political and social norms. In an unexpected reversal, the Hindu nationalist strategy, which had been successful for many years, was undone by the collective viewings of Pathan. Normative challenges to censorship have been framed in legal juridical terms: censorship versus freedom of speech. These participatory viewings, however, compel us to go beyond the language of the state by positing collective, shameless dancing as an alternate mode for contesting censorship. Its force was audible when, in a private political meeting, Prime Minister Modi scolded his party members for becoming preoccupied with frivolous things like Bollywood. While Modi's rebuke sought to diminish the power of Bombay Cinema, it relayed its opposite, namely that cinema was a formidable shadow state, and its legions, residents of Filmistan, could unsettle the agenda of Hindu nationalists. Inasmuch as I would like to end my presentation with this happy conclusion, let me complicate it. If we think about censorship not simply with respect to the text and whether a text gets cut or not cut, and what kind of certificate a film might get. If we think about censorship also in relation to access, we have to think about the film's distribution. Pathan released on 8,000 screens globally. At the time, it was the widest release for a Hindi film. When the film opened in India, it occupied majority of the screens, leaving little space for other films, at least in metropolitan cities. The fact that Pathan played in Ithaca, New York, where I saw it on its opening weekend, underscores its reach and confirms the combined power of male star Shah Rukh Khan, as well as Yashraj Productions, a prominent production house and global distributor. Therefore, I would urge an analysis which is attentive to violent calls for censorship, as well as an analysis which attends to the speech of freedom. We must ask what is being offered to us as free speech and what is at stake in this offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've given us a lot of food to work with, including where you ended on the question of what free speech we are being given that we are able to work with, which came up yesterday in our conversations as well.
Thank you. It was really like I was really thinking about like what does it mean to be censored um, in the times in the country that we're living in. Um, Something that I was thinking of is also, I don't know. I'm reminded of like the questions that always come after like some rape cases, protests against rape cases happen, and like the how like say the Nirbhaya case was got so much attention versus the Hathras case, which involves a Dalit woman, and like those inequalities. I was kind of connecting that to this idea of undoing Hindu nationalism. So like what happens if we like center like a caste reading of this, because like Shah Rukh Khan is also like an upper caste Muslim man. Uh, so is it that like we're okay to undo Hindu nationalism when it is like a powerful, it's still, I think, the logic of caste functioning there very strongly. So just thinking about who is a part of this collective, and also not to erase the complications of Shah Rukh Khan's fan base. I think it's one of the very diverse fan bases too. So just thinking about what does this collecting viewing as a way of undoing Hindu nationalism mean when we think of caste, and who, like similar to like what protests. And yeah, also just thinking about like a Pathan playing in so many theaters, but also like the single screens coming back, and just thinking about like because Hindu nationalism is Brahminical nationalism. So how do we read that? And just sorry, one more thought is that also that I was thinking about this murder of this a person called Sagar Shejwal in Maharashtra in 2015, because he had a ringtone of like an Ambedkarite song, and that led to his murder, and like the rise of Hindutva pop in India. So like it's almost like the sense outside of the censorship board, there is a mob censorship that is becoming. And even if like, yeah, so sometimes these look like gimmicks, and then the actual harm is happening also in the collective vigilante that's like kind of becoming. So just thinking through what is this collective, where does it become vigilante, where is it, and what help can caste and gender help in processing through this. So those are my scattered thoughts. Thank you.
As you were presenting, and especially when looking at the tweets and the effect those tweets had, it made me think of the industrial complex of censorship and how not only the state is involved, citizens are involved, profit is involved, capital is involved. So, with that in mind, could you make a comment on what the relationship between censorship and capital is in India? And then, in turn, a larger question on what is the language of censorship, and also what is the language of free speech in turn?
I was wondering if you could speak more on how much of this censorship is uniquely Hindu nationalist and how much of it is a digital authoritarianism, yeah, with a local accent.
So thank you very much for all of the questions. I think let me begin with the question related to caste first. I think part of, and I'll answer it both with respect to this film, but also by talking about another filmmaker that I'm working on, Leena Mari Megalai, who actually makes films about Dalits and Bahujans. So I think when we think about a song like this and protest to the song, when it's also important to then think about, as you said, whether this would have been an issue if the stars were Dalits or Bahujan, whether that would have mattered at all, right? So to that extent, um, uh, the fact that this matters points to precisely what you're saying, which is the Brahmanical nature of these collectives. Um, and and that said, I mean, I think when we move to films that are about Dalits, so there's a film that Lina Marimegalai has made. It's called Marathi. It's in Tamil. Uh, and when that film initially went to the censor board, and Mari Megalai sort of fought both its censoring as well as the certificate that it received. One of the things that the uh, the censors wanted to cut out from that film was this young Dalit girl looking at upper caste young men who were naked swimming. And they phrased it as like, we have to take out this illegal looking, right? And what was interesting is that in the context of the film, Dalit women get raped multiple times. But that didn't create any issue for them, right? What was important for them was that this young girl who is potentially desiring, and she's looking at them and their sexual desire, but there's also just the desire to freely swim in the same way that they are, right? So something like that, you know, so so it's interesting what and who's looking deserves to be and what kind of the kind of violence that's done doesn't require any kind of censorship, right? And I think this comes back to your question about the relevance of caste, but also I think to the question of how caste is baked into these censorship practices, right? In terms of, and then caste is baked into these protests against these kinds of these kinds of films. The other question, I think, with respect to, I think, censorship and capital is a really interesting one, and let me answer that by turning to Netflix. One of the interesting things has been that initially, when Netflix, Amazon, and these streaming platforms arrived in India, a lot of filmmakers felt that, oh, now we don't have to go through censorship through the Central Board of Film Certification. We can directly put our films on streaming platforms, and we'll have more kind of freedom of speech. But very quickly, what happened was, as these Hindu right protests started, the Netflix and Amazon quickly began to either take certain series off their sites, or even at the get-go, they started they started making decisions. So things that you don't even know or see, right? Because they never even make it, right? So and they made these decisions largely. It was very interesting to hear them explain why they were making these decisions, because they would say things like, we want to be respectful of Indian cultural values, which then begs the question, exactly which cultural values, right, are you being respectful of, right? So there's a way in which then these global corporations align with the state and align with these dominant communities. And they align with them in a large part because, for Netflix, India is a huge market, right? So those are their reasons for in terms of making those kinds of alignments. And I think within Bombay Cinema itself, there certainly has been a shift with regard to the kinds of films that are produced. So there are many more films that veer towards Hindu nationalism, and there's a lot of concern about uh, about making films that might offend this this particular group, because this particular group also has the support of the Hindu nationalist government. And then the final question about Hindu nationalism and digital authoritarianism. I mean, I think, we can certainly think about the ways in which the digital, while initially being, or at least promising to be, sort of the space of a certain kind of freedom, has in fact, has become quite regulated, but also in terms of the kind of speech that circulates on it, that speech is a kind of speech that's oppressive, right? It's a speech that seeks to silence. It's not, so their free speech seeks to silence other people's ability to speak in the first place. And I think the ways in which, so while the authoritarianism might, I think, be similar to the extent that these corporations are similar, right? So it's not as if we've gone to different kinds of corporations. And the ways in which these particular platforms and sites work. So there's a similarity, in terms of that. I think the specific set of terms and issues are very much, I would say, need to be worked through certain kinds of local and national contexts, that those terms are not necessarily always the same, right? So that when you think about, the question of South Africa and whether censorship functions in a similar way, right? And at least from the conversations that I've had with a few people, that that's not necessarily the case. So one has to think about, okay, what's going on in this context? How is the digital being worked out in this kind of context? That may not be the same.
I want to ask you to just think with us a little, to think aloud about what might have shifted in your reading of censorship from your first work on Bollywood cinema and questions of sexuality and the Besharam piece that you did now. So, in the kind of second book project, what you're marking and whether you're anticipating a shift in the configuration of censorship. And then I, just thinking along Monde's question, and it's not really formed, but I was struck as Monde was asking that question, how a particular mode of the technological in the early 1900s produced a response, an aesthetic response. And I'm thinking here about, besides Adorno's culture industry and so on, the way in which absurdism became a way of thinking about, the technology being overwhelmed, or the sensory being overwhelmed by the technological. So that by the time you get to the cinematic, you have Charlie Chaplin's slapstick and a staging of the kind of collision between the human and technology. And I was wondering whether, just viewing this, the song that you showed, the Shah Rukh Khan song, whether, we, at a little loss here, because what you're sitting with is spectacle without the kind of pointedness of a political critique. And I wondered what you might say, just to extend Monde's question a little, what we're dealing with in the realm of critique here, and if you had any thoughts.
What for me is different about the first iteration and this one is, as I think, as I said, is number one, the visibility of censorship. Censorship, I mean, when you think about it, and it sounds strange, right, for censorship to be visible in this way, right? A censorship is normally that which is thought about as invisible, that which is cut, that something that we don't see. But what these discourses are doing is that they're making things visible. You'd think that if what was really if this song was such a problem, and if this bikini was such a problem, we wouldn't see it, right? Like, we wouldn't see it. And yet it gets repeated, and it gets circulated and repeated again and again. So I think that I want to sort of think about this visibility, right? What does this visibility mean? How does it work? Why is it important? Who's doing it? The second thing, I think, what strikes me is that in terms of the ordinary people involved in this and their ability to share what they're saying on global platforms, because when I initially went, these letters would largely be in this file. If you were able to get access to that file, right? If they weren't easy to access. They weren't everywhere, right? So they were in this file that was located in a very dusty area of the Central Board of Film Certification in their basement, and I had to coax and cajole even to get a look at them. Whereas at this juncture, I can look at them pretty much anytime, right? I can also these reports, which again I can see it anytime. So again, we have this visibility, but also, at least with this visibility, a certain kind of power that a lot of these seemingly ordinary people have, right? So what does one make of this power and agency, right? And I think for me, we studied together in the 90s when when we were all talking about, like, voice to the people, voice, agency, and I'm thinking, voice to the people, agency? I'm not sure. In terms of about what that means in this context. And I feel like I have to reevaluate that in this context, with respect to, again, to go to your question, with respect, and a lot of that has to do with these shifting technologies, right? Which make this possible, which give essentially, the same kind of platform to people who otherwise, right, have differential power. So I think that would be the beginning of my answer.
More an observation, which I'd like you to respond to. Because it's, as I listened to you, I was thinking also of the transformation of Indian society, obviously, right? And what we have, it seems to me, is a transformation from a developmental state, right? A developmental state always has a certain vanguardist role, which is where censorship plays perhaps a especially important role. And as we know, censorship was in some ways even more important in India than it was perhaps in the US and other places, because there was very much a sense of the state being the vanguard. You know? And what we have now is a neoliberal populism. And I wonder whether censorship is the right word to use anymore when you're talking of neoliberal populism. Because it seems to me that, of course, the old censorship continues. But with neoliberalism, the task is itself different, right? It needs these things, as you're saying, right? It needs these things to be visible and to stay visible, because it is also constructing an enemy. And for how can you have an enemy if the enemy is invisible, right? So it has to construct a subtext, right? And the subtext becomes, in this case, the saffron colors, the green shirt, right, etc., become important in a very different way than it would have been in the older this thing. So I'd just like you to reflect on that a bit, and how this, whether, so a question I'd like to ask you really is censorship the language that we should be using anymore?
Jack Chen, University of Virginia. I wonder whether or not censorship is the right term also, but from a different angle. I'd like to ask about jouissance and the erotics and the perversion of viewing and the fetishization of the saffron as an emblem of purity. I mean, in some ways, it seems like it's a created emblem, because, I mean, it's an emblem only created in enunciation that this is an emblem of purity. But there's a certain amount of a desire to take pleasure in one's own shame, right? In the shame of the, this is not miscegenation, but it is that transgression of the Muslim and the Hindu here, and the idea of Hindu purity. And so there is, I think, this really weird perversion of the spectacle that's happening. And this may go back to Pramesh's question about the digital. I think this is about a surveillance culture that is also a performance of a kind of a perverted erotics of viewing.
My question is in relation to the question of cultural sacredness and people's agency. So I'd like to know from you if you think a genuine cry of misrepresentation can be used as a justified ground for censorship. So if people can go and say, no, we are misrepresenting our culture and all of those things, can that be used, as a justified ground for censorship? Thank you.
I'm just wondering about the function of censorship. And this is, I guess, in a way, I'm asking a question in response to Ajay and Jack's question, where whether or not the old censorship and what we're looking at now is still performing the same function, in the sense of whether it's about trying to shape a population's response or attitude towards a certain question, whether that's the state or a political project or a religious, etc., etc. So the speed of the digital might change how it looks.
Let me start with copyright, and then come to a set of questions that are interrelated. So India historically has had very loose copyright laws, and it's only post-economic liberalization that those laws become more stringent, both within India but also from outside. Where you have, for example, the head of the Motion Pictures Associations of America, who comes and says, "Hey, you guys are like, remaking our films, and you're not giving credit. You're not paying us." So there's a tightening with respect to censorship. What's interesting, with respect to, I think, songs like these, is that whereas in another context you might think, oh, the production houses would be worried about who takes what from these songs. but the but it's interesting, they're not worried so much about the songs. In fact, they encourage both the sharing but also the covers of these songs. So there's a lot of covers of Beshram Rang, or the other song in this film, Jhume Jo Pathan, uh, which then help, as far as the production houses uh, is concerned. In some ways, this is free labor, right? Where the song is circulating, people are remaking the song, and which again circulates the song. So so it's interesting where copyright gets invoked and where also then it doesn't get invoked, right? In terms of when and how the production house potentially can benefit from the kind of fan labor that's there. Uh, with let me address the question about misrepresentation. While certainly misrepresentation can be grounds for censorship, and Beshram Rang is precisely that, right? It's misrepresentation. The question again is which groups get to make an argument for that, right? And and whose sentiments or whose uh, requests to address misrepresentation gets accepted or not accepted within. And I think within the current landscape of India, misrepresentation is about misrepresentation of Hindus. Like that's the misrepresentation that matters. That's the misrepresentation that has clout, as opposed to other kinds of groups and communities. And now, with respect to the questions with respect to thinking through censorship, let me start with I think the question about what is the function of censorship today, right? So I think and perhaps let me contrast this with an earlier moment when censorship, you know, but when the state continues to have censorship, right? Like after 1947. What's interesting, if you look at many of the state reports, what they mention, or even legal cases, often what's mentioned again and again are instances of other democratic states, generally in the West, which also have censorship, right? Right. So there's a way in which the first order is freedom of speech, but what follows immediately is censorship, right? And there's a way in which to have censorship is to be a state, right? So having censorship is part of being a modern state. And when censorship, and one of the things that censorship, of course, does is that it immediately both limits and defines what freedom of speech is within the context of the democratic state. It continues to in India initially, and I would say even now, although perhaps the scales have perhaps shifted, it continues to be the site where morality gets located and ethics gets located, right? So even as we no longer need to worry about, whether certain industries are moral, it's censorship and the film industry specifically that becomes the site for working out of morality and ethics, right? Uh, uh, and then you can, do whatever you want in other industries where you don't need to think about the question, the question of the moral or question of the ethics. In terms of today, I would say that um, for uh, for the Modi government, but perhaps also the Congress, the censorship again becomes a way to confirm a certain, and this time not just moral order, but an Indian moral order. What counts as Indian morality in the face of of economic liberalization, when you have global corporations entering and potentially both different kinds of media content and objects from other places circulating, right? So what counts as Indian morality? And that needs to be worked out in the context of censorship. And I think that it becomes also for the state, in some ways, if you think about, let's say, the ways in which the this particular government, has been relatively, very active in terms of making deals with global corporations. When we think about sort of the farmers' protests that happened with regard to agribusiness coming in. So we don't need to be moral there, right? We don't need to be kind of thinking about ethics there, because we're thinking about morality, and so this becomes an even more important space for thinking about sort of the questions of ethics and morality. And here I would say even a further change: what is a Hindu morality, right? So that's our next iteration. What is a Hindu nation? And that we must protect that, right? In terms of sort of the realm of culture, that we're not potentially going to lose that. That there needs to be a reminder that even as these foreign businesses or foreign entities come in, a Hindu nation, a Hindu morality will remain. And Ajit and Jack, to just sort of go back to your questions about, is this censorship, and what is, if I'm getting you right, Jack, like what modes of spectatorship does it, what positions as spectators does it want us to occupy, right? And I think in terms of the spectatorial positions, I think there's a way in which it wants us, right? It wants us to kind of zoom in. I mean, when you think about it, again, it's a really rapidly edited song. You have to be a really close reader, right? Too close, right? To be like focusing on green, like, So there's a way in which that we begin to view the film in a fixed manner and characters in fixed manner, right? Where because when we think about, Hindi cinema specifically, Hindi cinema has always employed the archetype, but the archetype has always been a much more complex site and character, whereas this is all about a viewing practice and about pigeonholing, right? Where you can then easily work out that the dynamics of fixed communities, and then make decisions on the basis of that. And Ajay, is this censorship? That it's a good question. Like, is this, in terms of the ways in which it pivots on visibility, the ways in which it seems to certainly no longer require the state, even, right? We're going much beyond the state. It seems to even want to overthrow the state, right? And maybe populism. But it's something to think through. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Monika. Unless there are any burning questions, I think we can draw our session to a close. There is...
Or unless you'd like to dance.
I have to say that Monika actually wanted me to make a precondition for asking a question that you have to do a dance first, but I vetoed that, unfortunately, because that... Yeah, probably is. There is wine, there is food, there is also an invitation to dance.